Imagine sitting at a table with people who once wished for your downfall. You hold the food in your hand, everyone is watching, the silence is so loud you can hear your own heartbeat. Will you eat, or is the memory of the war too fresh to swallow? Today, the land of the Golden Crown witnessed a miracle that turned into a mystery. Let's quickly say a short prayer. Father, in any area of our lives where enemies have planted division, let your peace uproot it today. May our Queen Naomi's find justice, and may every hidden trap set for us be exposed by your light. Amen. Welcome to Crown Guest. If you haven't joined this royalty yet, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't miss the updates everyone is talking about. For a very long time, the land of the Golden Crown was not a place of joy, but a place of heavy shadows. You see, my Crown Guest friends and families, when you look at the palace from the outside, the gold shines so bright, but inside, there were wounds that refused to heal. The Golden King is a powerful man, a lion in his own right, but even a lion cannot have peace when his home is divided. For years, the talk of the town was the distance between the palace and Queen Naomi. We all know her story, the one they call the jewel of the kingdom. She is a woman of grace, but that grace was tested in fire. There was a time when the palace felt like a furnace for her. The silence had piled up so high, it became a wall. Trust wasn't just broken, it was ground into dust. People had moved on, and many had accepted that Queen Naomi would never again sit at the same table with those who had caused her so much heartbreak. But you see, God has a way of turning the script when everyone thinks the movie is over. The atmosphere in the land of the Golden Crown began to shift. It started like a whisper. People were saying that the natural balance of the kingdom could only return if the Golden King reconnected with his Queen Naomi. They said when light appears, darkness doesn't argue, it just packs its bags and leaves. The move for peace didn't start from the outside, it started from within. It was the Golden King himself and Dr. Elizabeth who began to see that the palace could not continue like a house divided. They knew that on the surface everything looked okay, but underneath there was wahala blowing like a storm. Dr. Elizabeth stood firm, pushing for a meeting that many said was impossible. They reached out to Queen Naomi. Can you imagine the tension? Sending a message to someone who has been hurt so deeply, asking her to come and sit with the very people who stood by while she suffered. Many people laughed. They said Queen Naomi agreed to come. Never. They remembered all the invitations she had declined in the past. She had built a fortress around her heart to survive. But this time around, something was different. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was the heavy prayers of the prophetess. When the message reached Queen Naomi, she didn't say no immediately. She took her time. The palace held its breath. The hidden enemies, those who thrive when the wise are fighting, were already mocking the idea. They were waiting for her to reject the offer so they could say, you see, she's the problem. But then the word came back, the shocker of the century. Queen Naomi said, yes. The day of the meeting arrived and the air in the palace felt heavy, like the clouds before a massive rain. When Queen Naomi finally stepped into the bathroom, the room went ice cold. Some of the wives couldn't even look her in the eye. There was fear, there was relief, and for some, there was a deep stinging shame. She didn't come in shouting, she didn't come in with a spirit of war, she just walked in with her presence, a presence that spoke louder than 1,000 screams. They sat in a circle. The Golden King sat there watching his wives. This was the first time in a lifetime that this group was complete. No one rushed to speak. The silence was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. You could see the internal battle on the faces of people like Olori's shadow. The pride was fighting with the reality of the moment. Then the words began to flow, slowly at first, then like a river. They started talking about the disappointments, the mistakes of the past, and the many ways they had wronged the queen. They admitted that they knew she had suffered, and they confessed that their silence during her pain was a weapon. It wasn't just a meeting, it was a confession session. Tears started to fall, and these were not called out tears for the camera. This was the sound of brokenness. The wives, led by the realization of what they had lost, began to apologize. They told Queen Naomi, we have ridiculed the Golden King enough with our fighting. We want peace. We want him to be happy. They begged her to forgive them, not because they were good people, but because the palace needed to breathe again. Queen Naomi just sat there. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself or point fingers. Her calm was terrifying to those who had hidden agendas. She listened to Olori's shadow weep and plead for mercy. She listened to the others promise that from that day forward, any enemy who are cut from the gate would have to face all of them. No more secret alliances, no more juju talks, no more darkness. But as the meeting ended and the food was brought out, the real test began. Because in our culture, you can talk peace with your mouth, but sharing a meal is how you seal a covenant. And what happened next is what has the entire land of the Golden Crown talking till today.
You see, for our land, to sit down and talk is one thing, but to break bread is a different matter entirely. That is where the physical meets the spiritual. As the wives finished their long talk, the heavy atmosphere of tears started to lift, but it was replaced by a strange neck-prickling suspense. The servants brought out the trays. This was the moment the hidden enemies, the ones watching from the shadows of the palace, were waiting for. They were whispering, "Let's see if she will eat. If she eats, the war is over. If she doesn't, the fire is still burning." The first thing they brought out were the garden eggs. In the land of the Golden Crown, the garden egg is a symbol of welcome and purity. It went round the circle. When it reached Queen Naomi, every eye in that room followed her hand. The Golden King was watching. Olori's shadow was holding her breath. Queen Naomi reached out. Her fingers touched the skin of the fruit and she picked one. A small sigh of relief went through the room. But then, she just held it. She didn't bite it. She didn't even bring it near her lips. She just looked at it like she was reading a message written on the skin of the fruit. Next came the groundnuts. Again, Queen Naomi picked a few. She held them in her palm, her grip firm but gentle. Still, not a single one entered her mouth. By now, the silence in the room had returned, but this time it was a curious silence. People were exchanging looks. You know how it is when you're hosting a guest and they refuse to taste your water. It makes the host start to wonder if the water is clean. Then the main meal was served, the heavy food that represents the strength of the household. Queen Naomi took a small portion as custom demands. She held the plate, she looked at the steam rising from the food, but her mouth remained closed. My Crown G's friends and families, imagine the tension. The other wives were eating, trying to look comfortable, but their eyes were darting back and forth to Queen Naomi's hands. Why was she refusing to eat? Was she afraid of what might gain the pot? Or was she sending a message that I have forgiven you with my heart, but my soul is still on guard? The beauty of the whole thing was that nobody pressured her. In the past, someone might have taken it as an insult. Someone might have shouted, "Why are you acting like you are better than us?" But not this time. The change in the palace was real. They told her gently, "Queen Naomi, it is okay. Just you sitting here with us is the greatest feast we could ask for." They respected her boundary. They understood that trust is like a mirror. Once it shatters, you can glue it back together, but the cracks are still there. You have to give the glue time to dry. As this was happening, something was shifting in the spirit. The prophetess, who had been watching everything with eyes that see beyond the physical, stood up. She had been quiet, observing the way Queen Naomi handled the food. She knew that this wasn't just about appetite. This was a spiritual transaction. By accepting the food in her hand, but not in her body, Queen Naomi was accepting the peace, but protecting her destinies. The prophetess stepped forward and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. She didn't come to tell stories. She came to seal the palace gates. She began to pray, and I'm telling you, it wasn't the kind of prayer you hear in a regular Sunday service. This was a war room prayer. She started by calling for the fire of God to surround the land of the Golden Crown. She prayed specifically for the unity of the wives. She said, any mouth that tries to whisper lies into the ear of the Golden King to divide these women again, let that mouth be sealed. She prayed that jealousy, the kind that leads people to seek dark powers and juju, would be uprooted from the palace soil. She mentioned that for too long, the palace had been a playground for those who love chaos, but that the season of confusion was officially over. As the prayers intensified, Olori's shadow and the others were nodding. Some were even sobbing again. It was as if the prayer was washing away the last bits of the heavy wahala that had lived in that house for years. The prophetess looked at Queen Naomi and prayed for her protection, asking that the peace she had brought back would not be used against her. The most shocking part was when the prophetess turned her attention to the hidden enemies. She warned that those who were unhappy about this reconciliation, those who had built their power on the wives fighting, would soon be exposed. She said that from that moment on, the palace was no longer a house of many camps, but one fortress under the Golden King. The meeting ended with a feeling of heavy victory. The
palace was shocked. The land of the golden crown was vibrating with the news. But as Queen Naomi walked out, still holding her peace, everyone knew that while the war might be over, the rebuilding of the walls had only just begun. The question on everyone's lips was, how long can this peace last before the shadows try to creep back in?
You see, for the land of the golden crown, what happened that day was more than just a meeting. It was like the breaking of a spiritual gown. For years, the wahala in that palace had acted like a blockage, stopping the flow of joy and progress. But as the wife stood up from that table, something broke in the atmosphere. The news began to spread like wildfire through the palace corridors. Servants were whispering, guards were exchanging looks, and the hidden enemies were suddenly feeling very cold. The most emotional part of this whole encounter was seeing the matriarch Kabiyesi take the floor for the second time. You know, it takes a lot for an elder to admit that they were part of the problem. With tears in her eyes, she turned to Queen Naomi once again. She said, "I am the oldest among you. If I had stood my ground from the beginning, if I had refused to join the whispers and the side talk, maybe things wouldn't have reached this dangerous level. My crown gives friends and families, can you feel the weight of that?" The matriarch was basically saying that she allowed herself to be carried away by the spirit of division. She admitted that her role as an elder should have been to protect the peace, not to watch it burn. But just as she was about to go deep into the who did what and who said that, Dr. Elizabeth stepped in. Dr. Elizabeth is a woman of wisdom. She knew that if they started counting every single wrong word and every single juju rumor from the past, the meeting would turn back into a fight. She raised her hand and said, "Enough! We are done with the apportioning of blame. If we keep looking backward, we will trip over what is in front of us. We must move forward." That was the turning point. The wives stood up together. They didn't just stand up as individuals. They stood up as a unit. They began to pray, not just the prophetess this time, but all of them. They were praying like people who had been in a cage and finally found the key. They were happy, they were relieved, and they were making a solemn vow. This issue of envy and bad belly had to stop. Now, let's be real with ourselves. We are all human. You and I know that when it comes to a polygamous setting, you can never completely take away every trace of jealousy. It's natural. But what they were fighting against was that dangerous level of envy. The kind of envy that makes a person enter juju houses. The kind of envy that makes a person seek the total destruction of their sister. They were saying, even if we are not best friends who eat from the same bowl every day, let us at least live in a way where nobody is attacking anybody. And truly, if God had not been on the side of Queen Naomi, we wouldn't even be talking about a reconciliation today. Let's call it spade a spade. With all the spiritual battles and the fierce right she faced, if not for divine intervention, Queen Naomi would have been gone a long time ago, God forbid. But look at her today. She didn't just survive, she won hands down. She stood her ground until the very people who were part of her pain had no choice but to bow to the peace she carries. The Golden King himself was seen looking at his house with a new kind of light in his eyes. For years, he had been the center of a tug of war. Every time he showed love to Queen Naomi, it would ignite a fresh fire of problem. But now, it has been proven beyond any doubt. The man loves his queen. And with this new peace, anyone who tries to start a fire again is really doing it to their own detriment. You cannot fight a battle that God has already settled. The palace was in a state of holy shock. People who had built their entire careers on carrying on croco between the wives found themselves out of a job. The division they used to feed their own pockets had dried up. As the wives began to talk about starting a new leaf, the land of the Golden Crown felt a weight lift off its shoulders. They decided that going forward, they would respect each other's distinct lives. No more monitoring of movements, no more secret alliances against one person. It was a total reset. But even as the sun set on the palace that evening, the question remained. Now that the wives have settled, what would the hidden enemies outside the inner circle end next? Because you see, when you stop a war, the people who sell the weapons never ever be harmed. As the night began to fall over the land of the Golden Crown, the reality of what happened started to sink in. You see, it is one thing to have a meeting, but it is another thing entirely to sustain the peace. Many people in the kingdom were still asking, why did Queen Naomi hold the food but refuse to eat? The truth is, my people, Queen Naomi is a woman of deep spiritual discernment. By picking up the food, she showed she has no bad belly or malice in her heart. She accepted their gesture of peace, but by not eating, she sent a powerful message. I have forgiven you, but I am not a fool. Trust is earned in drops, but lost in buckets. She was telling them that she is ready for a new beginning, but she will not lower her spiritual guard for anyone. She chose to protect the destiny that God has kept alive through so many years of fire and wahala. The Golden King, seeing this, did not get angry. Instead, he showed her even more respect. He saw that his queen is not just a woman of beauty, but a woman of steel and wisdom. The bond between them has become something so fierce that even the boldest enemy is now shaking in their shoes. If you are one of those people who used to enjoy igniting fire between the king and his jewel, I have a message for you. Your market has closed. Any attempt to bring back the division of the past will only result in your own total disgrace. The prophetess, Reverend Esaje, came back into the room one last time before everyone departed. Her face was like a flint. She looked at all the wives, Olori Shadow, TikTok Olori and the others, and she gave a final warning. She told them that the era of secret alliances and silent wars was over. She prayed that the spirit of unity would stand where division once lived. She made it clear that this gathering was not just for the women, but it was to protect the future of the entire lineage. They were closing doors that had been left open for far too long, and they were sealing a dark season to open a golden one. My crown gist friends and families, it was truly the shocker of the century. To see Olori Shadow crying and begging for a fresh start, to see the matriarch admitting her faults, and to see Queen Naomi standing tall like the victor she is, it's enough to make anyone believe in miracles. They have decided to live like sisters. Not the kind that must eat from the same plate, but the kind that will never again allow an outsider to use one against the other. As the wives finally went back to their own quarters, a strange silence fell over the palace. Not the heavy, painful silence of the past, but a peaceful silence. The kind of silence you feel after a great storm has finally passed and the sun is starting to peek through the clouds. The Golden King can finally rest, the kingdom can finally breathe, and Queen Naomi, she has proven that when God is with you, you don't need to fight with your fists. You only need to stand still and let him move. Now, before I leave you today, I must remind my crown gist friends and families of something very important. As much as this story is gripping and filled with emotion, we must remember that these are all alleged reports and unverified information making the rounds on social media. In this our world of gist, things move fast, and while we bring you the updates as they land, please do not take these as absolute facts yet. These are social media rumors and should be treated as such until official words come from the palace itself. We are here to keep you informed on what the streets are saying, but always keep your eyes open.